The pile of letters in Genevieve Bradford's trembling hands felt heavier than the iron skillet she had wielded for 8 years of marriage. And as she struck the match against the rough wood of her porch step, watching the flame catch and flicker in the dry Nevada wind, she wondered if burning the past would somehow cleanse the bitter taste of betrayal from her mouth. It was August 1878, and the sun hung merciless over Mojave, California, a town that existed more out of stubbornness than sense, clinging to the edge of the desert like a tick on a dying dog. Genevieve had been a widow for exactly 3 months, and in those 3 months, she had discovered more about her late husband Robert than she had learned in their entire life together. The letters, discovered in a locked box beneath the floorboards of their bedroom, told stories of another woman in San Francisco, of money sent and promises made, of a whole separate existence that had nothing to do with the dutiful wife who had washed his clothes and cooked his meals and shared his bed. The first letter caught fire easily, the dry paper hungry for destruction. Genevieve fed another into the flames, then another, watching the careful feminine handwriting curl and blacken. She had chosen the front porch for this ritual because she wanted the whole damn town to see if they cared to look. She was done with secrets. That is either a very small campfire or a very large statement. The voice made her jump, nearly scattering the remaining letters across the porch. She looked up to find a man standing at the edge of her property, tall and lean in the way of someone who spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into something both rugged and surprisingly gentle. His eyes, she noticed, were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after rain. "It is none of your concern," Genevieve said, but without much heat. She was too tired for real anger at a stranger. "You are right about that," the man agreed, but he did not move along. Instead, he gestured to the water pump at the side of her house. "I have been riding since dawn and my canteen is empty. Would you mind if I took some water? I can pay." Genevieve studied him for a long moment. He did not look dangerous, just weary, and there was something in his expression that suggested he understood about needing to burn things. She nodded toward the pump. "Help yourself. No payment needed." "Obliged," he said, and walked over to work the pump handle. The water came up reluctant and rust-colored at first, then cleared. He drank deeply, then refilled his canteen before splashing water over his face and neck. When he turned back to her, droplets still clinging to his dark hair, he looked almost human again. "Name is James Sawyer. Most call me just Sawyer." "Genevieve Bradford," she replied automatically, then felt foolish for the exchange. What did names matter, Mrs. Bradford, he said, acknowledging the formality. "I do not mean to intrude, but if you are burning things because you need to get rid of them, might I suggest using that old barrel there instead?" He pointed to a rusted metal barrel lying on its side near her small barn. "Less chance of setting your porch on fire, and the desert does not need another wildfire." It was practical advice, delivered without judgment. Genevieve found herself appreciating the lack of questions. She gathered the remaining letters, perhaps 40 or 50 of them, and walked over to help him right the barrel. Up close, she could smell horse and leather and clean sweat on him. Not unpleasant, just honest. Together they positioned the barrel in the dirt yard away from any structures. Genevieve dropped the letters inside and struck another match. This time the flames rose higher, more enthusiastic about their work. "Whatever they say," James Sawyer said quietly, "it will not matter after today." "How do you know they say anything bad?" Genevieve asked, though she knew the answer. "Because nobody burns letters full of good news," he replied simply. They stood there in silence for several minutes, watching the paper transform into ash and smoke. Genevieve felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of shame and anger beginning to unravel. When she glanced sideways at this stranger, she found him looking not at the fire but at the horizon, as if giving her privacy even while standing right beside her. "Were you just passing through?" she asked finally, surprising herself with the desire to keep him talking. "Was planning to," he admitted. "But my horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back. I was hoping your town has a blacksmith." "We do, old Henry Patterson, but his shop is closed until tomorrow. He goes fishing on Saturdays and nobody can convince him otherwise." James Sawyer absorbed this information with a small nod. "Then I suppose I am staying the night. Is there a boarding house?" "Mrs. Chen runs rooms above the general store. Clean beds, decent food." Genevieve stirred the ashes with a long stick, making sure everything burned completely. "Tell her I sent you. She will treat you fair." "I appreciate that." He adjusted his hat, preparing to leave, but hesitated. "Mrs. Bradford, I know it is not my place, but burning letters is just the start. Whatever story those papers told, it is finished now. You get to write the next one yourself." The words struck something deep inside her, part comfort and part challenge. Before she could respond, he had tipped his hat and started walking toward town, leading his limping horse by the reins. Genevieve watched him go. This stranger who had appeared at exactly the moment she was trying to destroy her past, and wondered if kindness always arrived so unexpectedly. That night, lying alone in the bed that still somehow smelled like Robert despite 3 months and countless washings of the sheets, Genevieve thought about stories. About the one she had believed she was living, the faithful wife of a hard-working freight company supervisor, building a simple but honest life in a harsh land. About the real story, which involved betrayal and lies and money sent to another woman while Genevieve darned socks by candlelight to save on expenses. And about the blank pages ahead, empty and terrifying and somehow thrilling. Sunday morning arrived with the same relentless heat that defined every summer day in Mojave. Genevieve dressed carefully in her dove-gray dress, the one that marked her as respectably widowed but not actively mourning, and walked to church. She had debated skipping, as she often did lately, but something made her go. Perhaps it was the same impulse that had made her burn the letters where people could see, a need to reclaim her place in the world. The church was a simple wooden structure that also served as the schoolhouse during the week, and it was already half full when she arrived. Genevieve took her usual seat near the back, nodding to neighbors who greeted her with varying degrees of warmth. The town had been kind enough after Robert's death in a wagon accident, but there had been whispers too, speculation about why a young widow seemed more relieved than grief-stricken. She was studying her hymnal, not really reading it, when someone slid into the pew beside her. She looked up to find James Sawyer settling in, clean-shaven now and wearing what were clearly his good clothes, though they were worn at the elbows and knees. "Forgive the presumption," he said quietly, "but I did not know anyone else, and you were kind yesterday." "It is fine," Genevieve heard herself say and realized she meant it. There was something steadying about his presence, like an anchor she had not known she needed. Reverend Walsh launched into a sermon about forgiveness that felt pointed enough that Genevieve wondered if he had heard about the letter burning. She tried to focus on the words but found her attention drifting to the man beside her. He sang the hymns in a pleasant baritone, clearly knowing the words by heart, and listened to the sermon with genuine attention. When the collection plate came around, he contributed coins that probably mattered to him, and she found herself revising her first impression. Not just a drifter then, but someone with principles. After the service, as people milled about in the yard outside, Mrs. Chen approached them with her usual brisk efficiency. "Mr. Sawyer paid for a week," she announced to Genevieve without preamble. "Said he might pick up some work while his horse heals properly. Told him you might know who is hiring." Genevieve blinked, surprised to be pulled into the stranger's plans. Well, I suppose the Patterson Ranch is always looking for hands, and the freight company might need drivers." "The freight company was your husband's employer, yes?" James asked carefully. "Yes." The word came out harder than she intended, but I imagined they would hire based on ability, not my recommendation. "Even so, I would not feel right seeking work there," he said, and she understood that he somehow knew or guessed that there was pain associated with that place. "The ranch sounds good. I know cattle and horses." "Then go see Hank Patterson, Henry's son. Big spread about 5 miles northeast." Genevieve provided directions while Mrs. Chen listened with bright, curious eyes. "You should take him out there," Mrs. Chen suggested with elaborate casualness. "You have that wagon, and I am sure Hank would appreciate a proper introduction." "Mrs. Chen, I barely know Mr. Sawyer," Genevieve protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Which is why you should help him find honest work," the older woman replied with impeccable logic. "So he does not become a stranger who drifts away." James Sawyer looked caught between amusement and embarrassment. "I can find my own way, truly. I have imposed enough." But Genevieve heard herself saying, "Tomorrow morning, I need to go to Patterson Ranch anyway to pick up eggs. You can ride along." She told herself it was just being neighborly, that it had nothing to do with the way his eyes had softened when he thanked her, or the fact that she had slept better last night than she had in months, dreaming of blank pages instead of betrayal. The ride to Patterson Ranch took them through some of the harshest country Genevieve had ever known, and she had lived here 8 years. The land was all scrub brush and sand, punctuated by rocks that seemed placed deliberately to break wagon wheels. The sun turned everything to bronze and shadow, beautiful in its own severe way. James Sawyer sat beside her on the wagon seat, and after an initial awkward silence, they began to talk. Small things at first: the weather, the quality of the road, the mountains visible in the hazy distance. But gradually, the conversation deepened. "Where are you from originally?" Genevieve asked as they navigated around a particularly nasty rut. "Nevada, mostly. Silver mining country. My father worked the Comstock lode until it worked him into an early grave." There was old pain in his voice, but acceptance too. "After that, I preferred being above ground, hired on with cattle drives, worked ranches from here to Montana." "That sounds like a hard life." "It is an honest one," he replied. "Every day you know exactly what you accomplished. Cattle moved, fences mended, horses trained. Nothing hidden or complicated." Genevieve heard the echo of her own thoughts in his words. "I grew up in Ohio," she offered. "Green country, lots of rain. My father had a small farm, nothing grand. When Robert proposed, moving west seemed like an adventure." "And was it, for a while?" She kept her eyes on the road. "Until I realized that adventure is just a pretty word for uncertainty, and uncertainty is just fear wearing a hat." James laughed, a warm sound that surprised her. "I have never heard it put that way, but you are exactly right. Every cowboy who says he loves the wandering life is really just saying he is scared of staying still." "Are you scared of staying still?" He considered the question seriously. "I was. But maybe what I was really scared of was staying in the wrong place. There is a difference." They reached the Patterson Ranch an hour later, passing through a gate marked with a simple P brand. The ranch house was a sprawling adobe structure that looked like it had been added onto multiple times, and the outbuildings included a proper barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse. Hank Patterson came out to meet them, a big man in his 40s with sun-damaged skin and kind eyes. Genevieve, good to see you. Come for those eggs. Yes, and to introduce a potential ranch hand. This is James Sawyer. He has experience with cattle and horses. Hank looked James over with the assessing gaze of someone who knew horseflesh and men equally well. You any good at breaking horses? I prefer training them, James replied. Breaking implies they have to be defeated. Training means you work with what they already are. Hank's eyebrows rose. That is an interesting philosophy. You ever put it into practice? Every horse I have ever worked with. I can give you a demonstration if you have got a difficult one. As it happens, I do. Hank gestured toward one of the corrals, where a beautiful paint horse paced restlessly. Been trying to saddle that mare for 3 weeks. She was mistreated before I bought her, and she trusts nobody. Give me an hour, James said simply. What followed was one of the most remarkable things Genevieve had ever witnessed. James entered the corral alone, moving slowly and keeping his body language deliberately non-threatening. He did not approach the mare directly, but instead stood in the center of the space, waiting. Eventually, curiosity overcame the horse's fear, and she edged closer. James let her investigate him, speaking in low tones that Genevieve could not quite hear. By the time the hour was up, he had the mare accepting a halter and standing calmly while he ran his hands over her neck and shoulders. He did not push for more, just establish that basic trust. Hank was nodding slowly, impressed. You are hired if you want the work. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You will bunk with the other hands, but the food is good and the work is fair. I accept, James said, shaking Hank's hand to seal the deal. I have to wait until tomorrow to get my horse properly shod, but I can start after that. That works fine. Come by Tuesday morning. Hank turned to Genevieve. Mary has your eggs ready inside, and she wants to talk to you about something, would not tell me what. Genevieve followed him into the house, where Mary Patterson greeted her warmly. Mary was a round, cheerful woman 10 years older than Genevieve, with graying hair and the permanent smile lines of someone who laughed often. Your eggs, Mary said, producing a basket covered with cloth. And I wanted to ask you something. I am organizing the harvest dance this year, and I need help with the planning. Would you be willing to join the committee? Genevieve hesitated. She had not attended any social events since Robert's death, unsure of her place. I do not know if that is appropriate. Nonsense. You have been widowed 3 months, and you are too young to spend the rest of your life sitting home alone. Mary's voice was firm but kind. Besides, we need someone with sense, and half the women in this town are all flutter and no substance. Please. Looking into Mary's hopeful face, Genevieve found herself agreeing. It felt like another step forward, another way of writing a new story. When she emerged from the house, she found James helping Hank move some feed sacks, despite not officially starting work yet. It spoke to his character, she thought, the way he simply helped when he saw a need. The ride back to Mojave was companionable. They talked about the ranch, about the dance Mary was planning, about small things that somehow felt significant. When Genevieve dropped James off at the general store, he lingered for a moment before climbing down. Thank you, he said. For the introduction and the kindness, I will not forget it. You earned the job yourself, Genevieve replied. I just provided the transportation. Even so. He met her eyes, and she felt something shift between them, some acknowledgement of connection. I hope I will see you again before I head out to the ranch. It is a small town, she said, trying for lightness. You can hardly avoid it. But she thought about him that evening as she went through the motions of her simple dinner, and again as she sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. Thought about the way he had looked at that damaged horse with patience and understanding. The way he had known, somehow, that she needed practical help with the letter burning, not sympathy or questions. Tuesday came, and James Sawyer rode out to the Patterson ranch on his newly shod horse. Genevieve told herself she had no reason to think about it, but she found herself watching the road more than usual, as if he might pass by her house even though it was not on the way. A week slipped past, then another. Genevieve attended her first Harvest Dance Committee meeting, and found herself enjoying the company of women she had held at arm's length for too long. She cleaned her house more thoroughly than necessary, started a small vegetable garden despite the challenging soil, and took on sewing work to supplement her modest widow's savings. Life continued, and she almost convinced herself that James Sawyer had been just a momentary brightness, already fading into memory. Then, 3 weeks after their trip to the ranch, she saw him in town. It was Saturday afternoon, and she was leaving the general store with supplies when she nearly collided with him on the boardwalk. "Mrs. Bradford," he said, steadying her elbow as packages threatened to tumble. "Forgive me, I was not watching. Mr. Sawyer." His name felt formal and strange in her mouth. Up close, she could see he had gained some weight, the hollows in his cheeks filling out with regular good meals. The ranch work clearly agreed with him. "How are you finding the work? Honestly, best job I have had in years." "Hank is a fair boss and the other hands are decent men. I have been working mostly with the horses." His face lit up when he talked about it. "That paint mare is fully trained now. Hank says I have a gift. I am glad." And she was genuinely happy for this near stranger. "Will you stay on then?" "After your initial month, if they will have me, yes, I like it here." He paused, then added carefully, "The town too, what I have seen of it." There was a question in those words, or maybe an invitation. Genevieve felt her heart beat faster. "It is not a bad place once you get to know it." "I was hoping you might help me with that," James said. "There is a church social next Sunday. Would you consider allowing me to escort you?" Genevieve's first instinct was to refuse. It was too soon, too visible, too much like declaring herself available for courting. But then she remembered standing over that barrel of burning letters, remembered his words about writing a new story. What good was destroying the past if she stayed trapped in it anyway? "Yes," she heard herself say, "I would like that." His smile transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more open. "Then I will call on you Sunday at 2 o'clock if that suits." "That suits perfectly." She walked home with her groceries feeling lighter than she had in months, maybe years. When she passed neighbors on the street, she returned their greetings with genuine warmth. The desert air smelled cleaner somehow, full of possibilities. Sunday took forever to arrive, and then suddenly it was there, and Genevieve found herself standing in front of her small wardrobe in a panic. Everything she owned was either too plain or too formal, marked too clearly as widow's weeds or outdated by several years. Finally, she settled on a blue cotton dress that had been her favorite before Robert died, simple but well made, the color bringing out the green in her hazel eyes. James arrived exactly at 2, riding a handsome bay mare and leading a gentle-looking sorrel gelding. "I borrowed him from the ranch," he explained, helping her mount. "Figured it would be more pleasant than a wagon on a day this fine." The social was being held at the church again, but the atmosphere was entirely different from a Sunday service. Tables had been set up in the shade of the building, laden with food contributed by various families. Children ran and played, their shouts punctuating the conversations of adults. A few men had brought instruments and were tuning up for later dancing. Genevieve felt self-conscious as she and James arrived together, aware of the eyes tracking their movement. But James seemed unbothered by the attention, greeting people with easy courtesy and keeping a respectful distance from her that nonetheless made his intentions clear. Mary Patterson swept over to them almost immediately. "Genevieve and Mr. Sawyer, how nice to see you. Hank tells me you are working miracles with the horses." "Hardly miracles, madam, just patience and consistency." "Well, it is working. That paint mare is the sweetest thing now." Mary turned to Genevieve with barely suppressed excitement. "I need your opinion on the decorations for the harvest dance. Would you come look at the samples I brought?" It was clearly an excuse to pull Genevieve aside, and sure enough, once they were out of James's earshot, Mary dropped the pretense. "He is absolutely smitten with you. Hank says he asked permission to borrow the horse specifically to escort you today." "Mary, we barely know each other." "That is what social events are for," Mary replied practically, "getting to know people. And I will tell you this. In 15 years of marriage, I have learned to trust Hank's judgment of character. He says James Sawyer is solid and decent, the kind of man who keeps his word. That is worth more than gold in this country." Genevieve wanted to protest, to maintain that this was all too fast, too soon after Robert. But the truth was that her marriage had ended long before Robert's death, killed by lies and betrayal even while appearing intact on the surface. And James Sawyer, with his quiet strength and honest eyes, represented something entirely new. The afternoon unfolded with easy pleasure. She and James ate together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in mining camps, about learning to read from his mother who had been a schoolteacher before marrying his father. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about the green hills and the change of seasons that she still sometimes missed. When the music started, James asked her to dance with a formality that made her smile. "I should warn you," he said as he led her to the cleared space serving as a dance floor, "I am better with horses than waltzes. Then we are evenly matched, because I have not danced in years." But somehow it did not matter that they were both rusty. He held her at a proper distance, but with a firmness that made her feel secure, and they moved together with surprising harmony. Around them, other couples swirled and children darted between the dancers, and the desert evening settled over everything with gentle warmth. "I am glad you said yes," James murmured as the song wound down. "To today, I mean." "So am I," Genevieve admitted, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. After that, James became a regular presence in her life. He called on her every Sunday, their outings ranging from church socials to simple rides through the desert to quiet conversations on her porch as the sun set. They were scrupulously proper in public, aware that Mojave was a small town with active gossips, but in private, a deeper intimacy grew. 6 weeks after that first church social, they took a picnic out to a spot James had discovered, where a rare spring created a small oasis of green in the brown landscape. They sat in the shade of a struggling cottonwood tree, eating sandwiches and watching hawks circle overhead. "Tell me about your husband," James said suddenly. "You do not have to, but I would like to understand." Genevieve had been expecting this question for weeks. She set down her sandwich and chose her words carefully. Robert was not a bad man exactly, just weak. He wanted more than life here could give him, more excitement, more importance. When he met this woman in San Francisco on a business trip, she represented all of that. She was sophisticated and beautiful and everything I was not. That is not true. "You do not know what I was like then," Genevieve said. "I was younger, quieter, content to be small. I thought that was what wives were supposed to be. And now I know that being small does not protect you. If someone is going to betray you, they will do it whether you take up space or not. So you might as well live fully." James reached across the space between them and took her hand, the first time he had done more than offer his arm. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. For what it is worth, I think you are the least small person I have ever met. You have this core of strength that comes through in everything you do. I do not feel strong most days. Strength is not about feeling it. It is about continuing anyway. He squeezed her hand gently. You burned those letters and started fresh. That took more courage than most people ever manage. They sat in silence for a while, hands joined, watching the play of light on the water. Eventually James spoke again, his voice lower and more vulnerable. I should tell you something. About why I was drifting when I came here. You do not owe me explanations. I want to give them anyway. He took a breath. I was engaged once 5 years ago. Her name was Catherine, and I thought we would build a life together. But when it came down to it, she could not handle the uncertainty of ranch work, the moving around, the modest pay. She married a store owner in Reno instead, someone who could promise her stability. I am sorry. I was angry for a long time, James admitted. Felt like I had been judged and found wanting. So I kept moving, never staying anywhere long enough to get attached. Told myself I was free, but really I was just running. What changed? He looked directly at her gray-green eyes, serious. I met someone who understood about burning the past and starting over. Someone brave enough to do it publicly, without apology. Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes. I was not brave. I was just so angry. Sometimes anger is what carries us until we find something better to hold on to. She thought about that as they packed up the picnic and rode back toward town. Anger had fueled her those first few months after Robert's death, after discovering his betrayal. But somewhere along the way, that anger had transformed into something more constructive, determination to live fully, to claim her own story. And James, who understood about being judged and left behind, who worked patiently with damaged horses until they learned to trust again, felt like part of that new story. As autumn approached, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the promise of the harvest dance, Genevieve found herself part of the community in ways she had never been during her marriage. The dance committee meetings became highlights of her week, chances to laugh with other women and feel useful. She took on more sewing work, not because she needed the money desperately, but because she enjoyed the craft and the independence it represented. And James remained a constant, steady presence. He worked long hours at the ranch but always made time for their Sunday visits. They attended church together, rode out into the desert, shared meals on her porch. The town had begun referring to them as a couple, and Genevieve found she did not mind. One evening in late September, as they sat watching another spectacular sunset, James asked, "Do you ever think about leaving Mojave, going somewhere else?" The question surprised her. "Sometimes, but where would I go? My life is here now. What if you could go anywhere, if nothing held you back?" Genevieve considered. "I would like to see the ocean. I have lived my whole life in landlocked places. Ohio, then here. The ocean seems impossible, something from books." "It is real," James assured her. "I saw it once years ago when a cattle drive took us to the coast. It is everything you imagine and more. Bigger than the desert, louder than thunder, endless in every direction. You make it sound magical. It is." He shifted to face her more fully. "Genevieve, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you see a future with me? Or am I just pleasant company while you figure out what comes next?" His directness took her breath away. She had grown used to their careful courtship, the slow building of trust. This question demanded more. "I care about you," she said carefully. "More than I expected to when you first appeared at my letter burning. But James, I made a mistake once, married someone I did not truly know. I am scared of doing that again." "That is fair," he nodded slowly. "So let me tell you some things so you can know me better. I am 32 years old." I have $15 saved, which is not much, but I am adding to it every month. I do not drink more than an occasional beer, and I have never raised my hand to a woman or child. I want a family someday if that is possible, but I would understand if you do not after your first marriage. I snore sometimes, especially when I sleep on my back. I am terrible at arithmetic but decent at reading, and I am completely, hopelessly in love with you. The last sentence hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore. Genevieve felt her heart hammering against her ribs. You love me. From about the second week I was here, when you drove me out to the ranch and talked about fear wearing a hat. Maybe even before that, when you stood by that barrel of burning letters looking fierce and fragile at the same time. His voice was steady despite the enormity of what he was confessing. I know it is soon. I know you need time. I am just telling you where I stand so you can decide where you want to stand. Genevieve felt tears sliding down her cheeks, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen and valued. I am not easy, she warned. I have opinions about things, and I do not like being told what to do. I am terrible at cooking anything except eggs and toast. I wake up too early and I hate being cold, and I am so scared of trusting wrong again that I second-guess everything. None of that changes how I feel. And I think I am falling in love with you too, which terrifies me. James's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. Can I kiss you, please? She whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but Genevieve met him halfway. The kiss was sweet and careful and full of promise, nothing like the perfunctory affection she had known with Robert. When they pulled apart, she was shaking. Are we doing this? She asked, her voice unsteady. Really doing this, if you want to. No pressure, no expectations except honesty. I want to, Genevieve said, and felt the rightness of it settle into her chest. I want to see where this goes. The harvest dance was scheduled for the first Saturday in October, and Genevieve threw herself into the preparations with new energy. She helped string decorations in the church hall, organized the food contributions, and even convinced several reluctant men to help move tables. Mary Patterson watched all this activity with knowing amusement. You are practically glowing, she commented as they hung paper lanterns. Love suits you. It is not love, Genevieve protested automatically, then stopped. Actually, maybe it is. Is that too fast? Robert has only been gone 6 months. Honey, your marriage to Robert ended long before he died, whether you knew it or not. And there is no schedule for healing or moving forward. You feel what you feel. Mary secured a lantern and moved to the next spot. Besides, James Sawyer is nothing like Robert. Everyone can see that. What was Robert like? To other people, I mean. I realize I never really knew. Mary was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. He was charming but never quite genuine, always playing a part trying to impress people. The men at the freight company respected his work but did not particularly like him, and there were rumors, long before he died. About the woman in San Francisco, about several women, honestly, Robert had eyes that wandered. Mary put a hand on Genevieve's shoulder. I am not telling you this to hurt you, just to remind you that what you had was not real. This thing with James, that is real. Hold on to it. The night of the dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool enough to be comfortable but not cold. Genevieve wore her best dress, a deep green silk that she had made herself years ago but never worn, thinking it too fancy for Mojave. Now she decided it was exactly right. James arrived to escort her looking nearly unrecognizable in proper town clothes, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. You clean up pretty well yourself, Cowboy. The church hall was transformed. lanterns casting warm light over decorations of autumn leaves and branches. Someone had even managed to procure pumpkins, which sat in glowing clusters on every surface. The whole town seemed to be there, farmers and shopkeepers and ranch hands all mixing together in the democratic way that frontier communities managed. Genevieve and James danced every dance, sometimes together, sometimes with other partners as courtesy demanded. But they always found their way back to each other. During a break in the music, Hank Patterson appeared with 2 cups of punch. "I wanted to say something to both of you," he announced without preamble. "James, you have been the best hire I have made in 10 years. You have a way with animals and people both, so I want to offer you a permanent position as head wrangler with a raise to $40 a month." James looked stunned. "Sir, I do not know what to say." "Say yes, you fool," Mary interjected, appearing beside her husband. "And there is a small house on the property, used to be for the foreman before we built the bunkhouse. It is yours if you want it, part of the job." "That is incredibly generous," James managed. "Yes, absolutely yes. Good, you can move in next week." Hank turned to Genevieve. "And you, young lady, are welcome at our ranch anytime. I am saying that officially as an adult who has watched you grow up in this town and thinks you deserve every happiness." It was as close to a blessing as anyone could give, and Genevieve felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Hank." After the Pattersons moved away, James took her hand and led her outside, where the night air was sharp with the promise of winter. Stars blazed overhead, undimmed by city lights. "A house," he said, wonder in his voice. "An actual house. It is wonderful news. Genevieve." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "I know this is sudden, and you can absolutely say no, but I need to ask. Would you consider marrying me?" Her heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "James, I know, it is too soon. But I have a steady job now, and a house, and I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. I want to wake up next to you every morning and build a life together and maybe, someday, have children if you want them. I want to be the person you burn old letters with and the person who helps you write new stories. I want all of it with you." Genevieve felt tears streaming down her face. "I am still legally in mourning. People will talk. Let them talk. But tell me how you feel, not what people will say." She took a shaky breath. "I feel terrified and excited and more alive than I have felt in years. I feel like you see me, really see me, not who you want me to be, but who I actually am. And I love you for that, James Sawyer. I love you so much it scares me. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes, with conditions. We wait until I have been widowed a full year before we marry publicly. I know it is conventional, but I need that time to be sure, and to let people adjust to the idea. Can you accept that?" "I would wait 10 years if that is what you needed," James said. "But I do not have to wait to do this." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my mother's. Nothing fancy, but it is real and it is honest like us." Genevieve let him slide the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. Then she kissed him with all the hope and fear and love tangled up inside her, there under the desert stars while music drifted out from the dance. The next months passed in a strange duality. Publicly, Genevieve maintained her widow's propriety, attending church and social events and going about her business with respectable reserve. Privately, she and James planned a future together. She visited the small house on Patterson Ranch, helping him make it into a home with curtains and rugs and small touches of comfort. They talked for hours about what they wanted their life to look like, negotiating and compromising and building something together. Winter came to the Mojave Desert, which meant slightly cooler days and cold nights. Genevieve continued her sewing work and saved every penny. James worked with the ranch horses and likewise put away money. They were building a foundation, brick by careful brick. Christmas arrived, and Genevieve spent it at Patterson Ranch, along with several other ranch hands who had no family nearby. It was the happiest holiday she could remember, full of laughter and good food, and the simple joy of being surrounded by people who cared. James gave her a leather-bound journal, empty pages waiting to be filled. "For your new stories," he explained. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, they sat by the fire in the main house, given privacy by the tactful Pattersons. "I started thinking," James said slowly, "about what you said about wanting to see the ocean. What if we made that our honeymoon? Took a few weeks and went to the California coast? Can we afford that? If we keep saving like we have been, yes. It would mean a later wedding, maybe April or May instead of March, but I think it would be worth it." Genevieve imagined it, the endless blue water, the salt smell, the sound of waves, and James beside her sharing the wonder. "Let us do it. Let us make it perfect." Spring 1879 arrived with unexpected grace, the desert blooming in ways Genevieve had never bothered to notice before. Tiny flowers emerged from apparently lifeless scrub, painting the landscape in delicate colors. Everything felt possible. On March 15th, exactly 1 year after Robert's death, Genevieve took off her widow's black for the final time. She stood in her small house, looking at the woman in the mirror. She was 26 years old, and she had survived betrayal and loss and reinvented herself. The woman looking back at her was stronger than the girl who had married Robert, more certain of her own worth. That evening, James came to call wearing his best clothes and carrying a small bouquet of desert flowers he must have ridden miles to collect. "I thought we could make an announcement," he said. "If you are ready." "I am ready." They went to dinner at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where the owner had arranged for several prominent townspeople to be dining as well. In the middle of the meal, James stood and cleared his throat. "Friends and neighbors, Genevieve Bradford has done me the enormous honor of agreeing to become my wife. We will be married on May 10th, and you are all invited to witness and celebrate with us." There was a moment of surprised silence, then genuine applause. Mrs. Chen was beaming. Reverend Walsh raised his glass in toast, and Genevieve felt the last chains of her old life fall away completely. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Mary Patterson insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at the ranch. Mrs. Chen coordinated contributions for a community wedding gift. Genevieve sewed her own wedding dress, simple but beautiful, in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. James moved permanently into the foreman's house and began making improvements, building furniture and reinforcing the roof. Genevieve spent weekends there, helping him transform it into their future home. They planted a small garden, optimistic despite the challenging climate. Every plant that survived felt like a promise kept. As the wedding approached, Genevieve found herself thinking about Robert less and less. She had burned his letters, but more importantly, she had stopped letting his betrayal define her. James had helped her do that, not by making her forget, but by showing her that one bad marriage did not mean all love was false. The night before the wedding, Mary Patterson insisted Genevieve stay at the ranch house, maintaining the tradition that the bride and groom should not see each other. As Genevieve lay in the guest room, she felt remarkably calm. No doubts, no fears, just certainty that tomorrow would begin the best chapter of her life. May 10th dawned clear and beautiful, the sky that particular intense blue that only exists in desert country. The wedding was held outdoors at the ranch, under a hastily constructed arbor covered in flowering vines that Mary had somehow coaxed into bloom. Chairs were arranged in rows, and it seemed like all of Mojave had turned out. Genevieve walked down the makeshift aisle without anyone to give her away, claiming herself for this new beginning. James waited at the altar, looking stunned and happy and more handsome than she had ever seen him. When she reached his side, he took her hands and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about second chances and new beginnings and the courage it takes to love again after loss. When he pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with such tender passion that several people in the audience cheered. The wedding breakfast was a joyous chaos of food and music and celebration. People who had known Genevieve throughout her first marriage told James how lucky he was, and meant it. Ranch hands who had worked alongside James for months congratulated him with genuine affection. It was exactly the community celebration Genevieve had never known she wanted. As the sun began to set and people started heading home, James and Genevieve slipped away to their little house. They had decided to spend their wedding night there before leaving for their honeymoon the next morning. Inside, flowers filled every surface, gifts from friends and neighbors. "Mrs. Sawyer," James said, testing the name. "How does that feel?" "Right," Genevieve replied simply. "It feels absolutely right." That night, in the privacy of their own home, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that was entirely new to Genevieve. James was patient and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a completeness she had never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you so much it still scares me sometimes." "That is okay," James replied, kissing her forehead. "We can be scared together, as long as we are together." The next morning, they loaded their bags onto a rented wagon and began the journey west toward the coast. It would take them 5 days of steady travel, passing through small towns and staying at modest inns along the way. James had planned the route carefully, making sure they would be comfortable and safe. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the harsh desert giving way to grasslands, then foothills, then the beginnings of coastal mountains. Genevieve watched in wonder as the scenery transformed. She had lived in brown country so long that the increasing greenness seemed almost unreal. They talked endlessly as they traveled, sharing stories and dreams and plans for the future. James wanted to eventually own his own ranch, modest but successful. Genevieve talked about maybe opening a dressmaking business, using her sewing skills more professionally. They discussed children, agreeing they wanted them but were not in any rush. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they crested a hill and there it was. The Pacific Ocean, stretching impossibly vast to the horizon. Genevieve gasped, all her imaginings failing to capture the reality. It was bigger than the sky, more powerful than anything she had ever witnessed. James drove the wagon down to the small coastal town of Monterey, where he had arranged for them to stay in a simple but clean hotel near the water. They checked in quickly, then walked hand in hand to the beach. Genevieve stood at the edge of the continent, waves crashing at her feet, and felt tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "It is everything," she said to James, who stood beside her with his arm around her waist. "Everything and more. I am glad I could share this with you." They spent a week in Monterey, filling their days with exploring tide pools, walking the beach, eating fresh seafood, and making love in their sun-filled hotel room. Genevieve felt like a different person by the end of it, expanded somehow, full of possibility. On their last evening, they sat on the beach watching the sunset paint the ocean in impossible colors. "I want to come back here," Genevieve said. "Someday, when we have children, I want to bring them here and show them how big the world is." "We will," James promised, "as many times as you want." The journey back to Mojave felt both too long and too short. Genevieve was eager to begin their real married life, but she also treasured these days of just the two of them, suspended outside ordinary time. By the time they reached the Patterson ranch, she felt ready for anything. Their little house welcomed them home, and Genevieve set about making it truly theirs. She unpacked their few belongings, arranged the wedding gifts, and hung curtains she had sewn before the wedding. James returned to work with the horses, and Genevieve took on more sewing projects, building a small clientele. Summer passed in contented routine. Genevieve discovered she loved being married to James in a way she had never loved being married to Robert. Every day brought small pleasures. Waking up beside him, cooking meals together, sitting on their porch in the evening while he told her about his day and she shared hers. They were building a life of genuine partnership, and it felt revolutionary. In August, Genevieve realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She waited another week, then another, before finally admitting to herself what it might mean. When she told James, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "An actual baby." "Not for 7 more months," Genevieve cautioned, but she could not stop smiling. "A lot can happen." "Nothing bad will happen," James declared with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything precious. "I will make sure of it." Genevieve did not have his certainty, but she let herself hope. As her body changed and grew, she found herself thinking about the future in concrete ways. They would need a bigger bed, more blankets, clothes for a baby. She started sewing tiny gowns and blankets, each stitch a prayer for safe delivery. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Genevieve was sick most mornings for the first few months. Mary Patterson became her guide through the process, offering advice and reassurance. James hovered protectively, trying to keep Genevieve from doing anything strenuous, until she finally had to tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. Winter came again, and with it, preparation for the baby's arrival. James built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, carving their initials and the baby's expected birth month into the headboard. Genevieve washed and rewashed the tiny clothes. They discussed names, finally settling on Jacob for a boy and Grace for a girl. On March 22, 1880, 2 weeks before her due date, Genevieve's water broke. James rode immediately for Mary Patterson and the town midwife, Mrs. O'Brien, while Genevieve tried to stay calm. The pains came hard and fast, and by the time help arrived, she was already deep in labor. It was the most difficult thing she had ever done, 18 hours of exhausting work. James stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. Finally, as dawn broke over the desert, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his determination to be heard. "Jacob," Genevieve whispered, looking at the tiny, perfect human in her arms. "Jacob Samuel Sawyer." James was crying openly, touching the baby's small hand with one finger. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you both so much." The first weeks were exhausting but wonderful. Jacob was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Genevieve marveled at how James took to fatherhood, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Jacob when he fussed. This was what partnership looked like, she realized. This was what love actually meant. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, Genevieve had recovered her strength and was taking on sewing projects again. James continued to excel at his work, and Hank Patterson had mentioned the possibility of making him a partner in the ranch within a few years. Their little house felt perfect, full of love and laughter and the everyday chaos of a growing family. One evening, as they sat on the porch with Jacob drowsing in Genevieve's arms, James said, Do you ever think about those letters you burned? That day we met, Genevieve considered. Sometimes. But they feel like they belong to a completely different person, like I am reading about someone else's life. You are a different person, James agreed. We both are, better versions of ourselves. Because we found each other. Because we were both brave enough to start over. He reached over to stroke Jacob's downy head. And look what we built. Genevieve looked at her husband and son, at the home they had created together, at the life that had emerged from the ashes of her old one. It is a good story, she said softly, the one we are writing together. The best story, James corrected, leaning over to kiss her gently. And we are just getting started. The years that followed bore out the truth of his words. Jacob grew into a sturdy, happy toddler with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 2, Genevieve discovered she was pregnant again, and 9 months later, their daughter Grace arrived, tiny and perfect. 2 years after that came Samuel, completing their family. James did become a partner in the Patterson Ranch, working alongside Hank to build it into one of the most successful operations in the region. His reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from miles around to have him work with their difficult animals. Genevieve's dressmaking business flourished as well, and she trained 2 younger women in the craft, creating employment for them and help for herself. They moved to a bigger house on the ranch property, one with enough room for their growing family and a workshop where Genevieve could sew. The children grew up surrounded by horses and wide sky, learning the values their parents held dear: honesty, hard work, kindness, and the courage to start over when life demanded it. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James surprised Genevieve with another trip to the ocean. They left the children with the Pattersons and spent a week in Monterey, revisiting the places they had explored on their honeymoon. Standing on the same beach where they had stood a decade before, Genevieve felt the weight of all the good years between then and now. "I want to tell you something," she said, taking James's hand. "I never properly thanked you. For what? For seeing me that day when I was burning those letters, for not judging or pitying or trying to fix me, for just being present and kind and offering me water." She squeezed his hand. "You helped me start a new story, James, the best story of my life." James pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding day. "You did that yourself. I just had the extraordinary luck of being there when you needed a witness." "We witnessed each other," Genevieve corrected. "We still do every day." They stayed on the beach until sunset, watching the waves and talking about their life. About how Jacob wanted to be a rancher like his father, how Grace showed talent for drawing and dreamed of being an artist, how little Samuel was just beginning to form his own personality. About their hopes for the future, both near and distant. When they returned to Mojave, life continued in its beautiful, ordinary way. The children grew and changed. The ranch prospered. Genevieve and James grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. On summer evenings, they sometimes sat on their porch and told the children about how they met, about burning letters and starting over and being brave enough to build something new. Jacob and Grace and Samuel listened with the particular attention children give to their parents' origin story, understanding that they were the fruit of that courage. Years turned to decades. Jacob grew up and married a teacher from Carson City, bringing her home to help run the ranch. Grace went to San Francisco to study art, thriving in the city but always returning to visit her beloved desert home. Samuel became a veterinarian, applying his father's gift with animals to healing work. Through it all, Genevieve and James remained the center of their family, the foundation everything else built upon. They had their challenges, droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that scared them, the normal wear and tear of long life. But they faced everything together, with the same partnership they had forged over a barrel of burning letters on a hot August day. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. The house was full of noise and laughter, multiple generations mingling in joyful chaos. After dinner, Jacob stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that it is never too late to start over, that real love is built on honesty and partnership, and that the best stories are the ones we write ourselves." Everyone drank to that, and Genevieve felt tears in her eyes. She looked at James, who was watching their family with an expression of profound contentment, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From betrayal and loss to this abundance of love and life. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, she and James sat on their porch one more time. The desert stars blazed overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding vows, every important moment of their shared life. "You ever regret it?" James asked quietly. "That we did not have more time. If we had met earlier before Robert," Genevieve considered carefully. "No, because meeting you when I did in the midst of burning my past meant I was ready to appreciate what we could build. If I had met you before, I would have been a different person. Maybe not the right person for you." "You are exactly the right person," James said firmly. "Always have been, always will be." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the night. Genevieve thought about the girl she had been, burning letters in desperate anger. About the courage it had taken to invite a stranger to help, to accept kindness, to risk loving again. About how James had seen her clearly from the very beginning and chosen to stay. "I would do it all again," she said finally. "Every hard moment, every scared decision. Because it led me here to you, to this life we built." "So would I," James replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Best decision I ever made, stopping at that water pump." As they eventually went inside to bed, Genevieve felt the profound satisfaction of a life well lived. She had survived betrayal and found true love. She had raised strong, kind children. She had built a business and a reputation on her own skills. She had seen the ocean and the desert bloom in her grandchildren's faces. She had written her own story, with James as her partner and co-author, and it was everything she had never known to hope for. The years continued to pass, gentler now, as James and Genevieve moved into their 70s. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren, and remained the heart of their sprawling family. James's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but he still worked with horses when he could. Genevieve's eyes weakened, but she still sewed when the light was good. They talked often about that day they met, the memory growing more precious with time. "You were so fierce," James would say. "Standing over that barrel like you were burning down the whole world. You were so calm," Genevieve would reply. Like spontaneous letter burning was just a normal Tuesday occurrence. And they would laugh together, sharing the joke that only they fully understood. On a spring morning in 1915, as Genevieve tended her garden with Grace's help, she paused to watch James working with a young horse in the corral. He was 87 now, moving more slowly but still patient, still skilled. The horse, a nervous mare someone had given up on, was beginning to trust him. "That is what you did for me," Genevieve said to Grace, watching her husband work his quiet magic. "Your father. He did not try to break me or fix me. He just helped me learn to trust again." Grace squeezed her mother's hand. "You did the same for him, Mama. He told me once that he had been drifting for years, not belonging anywhere. Then he met you and finally found home." That evening, as they prepared for bed, Genevieve told James what Grace had said. He smiled, pulling her close in the way they had done thousands of times over their decades together. "It is true," he confirmed. "You were my home from the moment I saw you. Everything before that was just wandering." "We found each other," Genevieve whispered. "In the exact right moment, in the exact right way." "We did," James agreed, "and I am grateful for every single day since." They fell asleep in each other's arms. Two people who had taken broken pieces and built something whole, who had started with burning letters and ended with a legacy of love that would extend through generations. Outside, the desert night settled over their ranch, over the life they had created, over the family that was their greatest achievement. The story that began with destruction and ended with such abundance was theirs alone, unique and unrepeatable. But its themes were universal: the courage to start over, the power of genuine partnership, the way love can heal even the deepest wounds. James and Genevieve Sawyer had written their own story, word by careful word, choice by brave choice, and it was magnificent. As dawn broke over the Mojave Desert on another beautiful day, the ranch stirred to life. Jacob managed the daily operations now, but his parents remained the soul of the place. Their little house, expanded over the years but still fundamentally the same structure where they had begun, stood as testament to what could be built from nothing but love and determination. In the years that followed, until James passed peacefully at 92 and Genevieve followed him 18 months later at 90, they continued to be an example to everyone who knew them, of partnership and resilience, of starting over and choosing joy, of burning the past when necessary and embracing the future with open arms. Their children laid them to rest side by side in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch, with headstones that bore not just their names and dates, but a simple inscription that captured everything. She was burning her dead husband's letters. The cowboy helped her start a brand new story. Together, they wrote a masterpiece. And in the memories of their descendants, in the lessons passed down through generations, in the very bones of the ranch they had built together, James and Genevieve Sawyer lived on. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had chosen courage over fear, who had proven that it is never too late to start writing a better story. The desert bloomed every spring, as it always had and always would, tiny flowers emerging from apparently lifeless ground. A reminder that beauty and new life can come from the harshest circumstances, if you are brave enough to nurture it. Just as Genevieve had been brave enough to burn those letters, and James had been brave enough to stop and offer help, and together they had been brave enough to build something lasting and true. Their story ended as all stories must, but its echoes continued. In Jacob's patient management of the ranch, his father had helped build. In Grace's art, which captured the severe beauty of the desert they had loved. In Samuel's gentle care of wounded animals. In grandchildren and great-grandchildren who grew up hearing about the letter burning, and the cowboy and the love that changed everything. And somewhere in the vast archives of human experience, filed under tales of second chances and hard-won happiness, the story of Genevieve Bradford and James Sawyer remained. A reminder that the past does not have to define us, that love can find us even in our darkest moments, and that the best stories are the ones we have the courage to write for ourselves. She had been burning her dead husband's letters on a scorching August day in 1878. He had been a cowboy passing through, stopping for water and offering unexpected kindness. Together, they had started a brand new story, and it had been worth every word.